we've got a slideshow that will be behind us.
So these are the photos from the archive of the Vietnamese Mental Health Service. So let's start with the question with Will. How do you come around to create the movie?
So I actually met Lily first because I did projects at Ambient Foundation. Lily's the chair of the Vietnamese Mental Health Service, and I actually really wanted to expand on looking at Vietnamese community centres in London, and there was so much out there, and actually the Ambient archives are downstairs, so you're welcome to come if you have time. But there is so much still out there, and the Vietnamese Mental Health Service had done so much, so it was just by accident. And then I met Jack at this event. It was really weird at Buckingham Palace, where the king wanted to celebrate like ESEA people. And so yeah, just briefly, that was through that, and then Jack invited me to make a film, and it was lovely because it was commissioned by the community who wanted a film, so it was within the community, and it was a privilege because I have been trying to make a film, and my previous film was with Mr. Vu, who sadly passed away, so it's lovely to share this moment as well. That was it.
Thank you for sharing that. It's a really impactful project, right? And a question for Jack. So I know that you've been a part of the resettlement refugee, or the Vietnamese refugee board since its early days, since the 1980s. You were responsible as a refugee actor, right? You're responsible for the resettlement of the Vietnamese community from Hong Kong to the UK. So how does the journey has impact the VMHS today and understanding its needs and support for mental health?
First of all, that in the early days when we first came to this country in early 80s, we never thought mental health is an issue in the community. But along the line, we identify a number of Vietnamese who suffer mental health problems, and we don't know how to help them in the early days. And that's the first thing. Second is that during the Vietnamese Community Development Program from between 83 until 88, we managed to establish around 50 community organizations around the country. So each major city or borough in London will have one community group to support the neural family and their borough. But mental health, there's no one know how to help them. We don't know how the system works. Many of the terms using in the psychiatry, there's no equivalent word in Vietnamese either. So, and also a number of Vietnamese admitted to Guy Hospital in London at the time. And one psychiatrist at Guy is interested and said, let's carry out a research and see how best to help Vietnamese on this issue. And at the same time, in the community, we also identify a number of young Vietnamese men, in particular, in the early 20s, suicide in London. So that research formed the base for the organization to form from there.
Just to add briefly, just to add briefly something. So there was the fragmentation and dispersal policy. So the Vietnamese people, when they came to England, the government tried to disperse them around the country so there wasn't a burden on local services, but it meant that they were quite isolated. And they also came from like refugee camps in Hong Kong where they might have used like drug use and other stuff. So there was a lot of context with the mental health service.
Right, and that's what the boat journey, the boat people that's come from as well, right? Any questions that you want to expand? Okay, Focal Quinn, I think this is where I know that you're also working to support with the Vietnamese community since 1994. and your work specifically focused on women, right? And if I were to ask you the same question, similar to Jack, what type of needs and supports in terms of health and well-being did the community need at the time when they arrived in 1994, for women specifically?
Hi, yeah. So that for us it's a little bit different because we have we set up a Vietnamese women and children group in Lewisham. So we are the kind of self-help group, voluntary group. We realize that the Vietnamese women suffer from domestic violence, suffer from lack of understanding about the system. They need to learn about parenting. They need so many things that we have to help. And again, that when working by case to case, and we realize that the big gap in language as well. So first we got like small group, and then later on we had to set up the language classes. So yes, so that to develop with on by day, and then later on we run now like a language classes, and that's happened like only one we survive for now for the Vietnamese classes. For me, I think that the mental well-being is play a role so important for the community, because if you look at any other community, they go to the church, they go to the temple, they go. But Vietnamese, we don't have those. We don't have the way that people suffer from trauma, people suffer from a lot of things, struggling in life. They don't have other things to do, so that they just being like suppress themselves, try to survive. And all those problems about domestic violence, they have no one to talk to. And yes, so that the role of Vietnamese mental health is so important when people get into like secondary care. But like every day for the Vietnamese women group, for example, we help them like prevention. And then to make the problem like don't go further, we have to work with language classes to actually tell the children how to support the parent or how to support each other. Big problem. Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing, because personally I also realize when you talk about Vietnamese mental health, let alone the topic of mental health and well-being for women, it's I realize we might not too inclusive for each other, and even within the community, and in the Vietnamese language as well, like you both have stated, there's an apparent gap between the literal translation of the term and also its implication when we use it, like the term mental health. The first Vietnamese psychological association term that I'm aware of in Vietnamese is manipulation. It's like emotional manipulation, which is thao túng tâm lý. So that's my first word that I have heard of. And the list goes on as Gen Z words, so like gaslighting, but we use that term specifically in English, not even a Vietnamese straight translation to that. So I think we both share our realization over that. And how about you, Will? Because when you make the movie, right,
yeah,
you have to interview the user or the stakeholder.
Okay. So basically, I can just carry on from that, because when I was interviewing the service users, I actually had to use a script. So my Vietnamese isn't that good, so I used a structure, and it helped me guide what I was going to ask them, but also I noticed some things, and you helped me with this, with the Vietnamese language. So one of the service users at the end, his name is Hung, and he named his pronoun, he said he's Joe, so he called himself like a child in relationship to the mental health providers, or it's an acknowledgement of respect. But in that instance, in the film, he said Joe, and I wouldn't have known that if it wasn't picked up upon.
actually today we're very lucky to also have Dr. Lily and Dr. Angela, who trained as the clinical psychotherapist and was in the management in VMHS as well. So I would also like to share the floor with them and to extend our discussion further. How have you been able to engage and create a culturally sensitive mental health support? And how do you see the intersection between culture, mental health, and art?
Okay, so shall I take the first part and then we'll share? So in terms of developing a culturally sensitive mental health service, I think this applies not only to the Vietnamese community but also to any racialised community or marginalised community, I think. And the first I would say would be the gaining trust with the community. And to have that sense of trust, you would need to really understand the culture. And I think there's a big misconception amongst mainstream services in the UK that actually it's just the language that's the barrier. But it's much more deeper than just a language. So, there's people who may know there's a misrepresentation of marginalised, racialised communities in NHS mental health services because the services are not culturally sensitive to what the communities need. And it's coming from a very Eurocentric view. The types of therapies that are developed are very Eurocentric. And in the West, it's just because it's thinking about the culture, it's just the language. So what they often do is have interpreters, but that it's not just having an interpreter in the room. The interpreter's often not the same person. We don't know whether they know the nuances of the Vietnamese language in different regions of Vietnam, but also understanding the cultural context of mental health as well. So we know that in the UK over generations it's become more acceptable to talk about mental health, whereas in Vietnam it's associated with the more severe end of madness, if you like. So who is going to want to engage with a service where they be identified within their community of being very unwell? There's a lot of stigma with that. So I would say trust is a big thing. And there's lots of layers to this, so I'm just going to keep it quite short and concise. There's lots of layers. So the first one is trust. I think the second one is then thinking about what's important to that community. So really being with alongside that community and not putting the lens of what we think is important as a Western model, or a psychologist even. It's thinking, okay, what brings this community together? What makes them be well? Sharing of food, which Angela will talk about a project that she developed, which was really amazing with the community, gardening, walking. So traditionally in NHS, those aren't seen as mental health interventions, but actually for a lot of marginalised communities, that is the intervention to go. And you asked also about the intersect with arts. I think, for a lot of people, everyone has their own avenue of processing difficult emotion and being well. And I think art is a really great forum for that. And there's a lot of, there's drama therapy, lots of things that draw on the body as well. I think, the West is very much in the mind, but in the Eastern culture, there's a lot of connection between the mind and the body in relation to processing trauma and things like that. So I think art is a really, I would say more like a natural way of processing things actually, rather than talking. Some people, it's not natural to talk about what's wrong or what's difficult. And I think also in terms of developing sort of sensitive, culturally sensitive interventions is to really work with the community so you co-produce the intervention together. So you're doing it jointly, there's no power differential in that way. The therapist will facilitate what's already there and bring out the strengths in that way. So yeah, that's what I was saying to Angela.
Thanks, Lily. And yeah, as somebody who's not Vietnamese, so I'm Irish, I lived here for a long time, but I guess in terms of being culturally sensitive or culturally competent, for me that rested on the relationship I had with Vietnamese workers in the Vietnamese mental health service. And a lot of that was about building trust between us as well and understanding. And I think, Lily has said a lot of things very, eloquently, and just to maybe add on to that, I think one of the problems with a kind of Eurocentric approach to therapy, it's very individualistic, and I guess the way that we were working often was a bit more collectivist. You could see the Recipes of Life project, which was where we were in the community kitchen, but also it's a type of narrative therapy which uses storytelling and ways of connecting people to the strengths of their culture, their heritage, their family, their community. So I think, really moving away from the idea of people as being sort of passive recipients of trauma, that they're, people with many skills and knowledges. And and I think, one of my favourite sections in the film as well is where Cara is talking about her project. And I think the arts projects, you can see, people really loved taking part in those. And they were also collective projects. They weren't just, individual. And I think there's something really beautiful about the way the people, feel the space is theirs, that space where the Vietnamese Mental Health Service office was and the estate around it and everything like that. And I think often in our experience, people didn't feel entitled to the space. And I think those kind of arts projects and some of the other things we did, like Walk and Talk, really helped people with that. So.
Thank you for sharing that. I remember we both discussed how significant the recipe of life was. Because food is our love language, right? It's like we share, and just having the activity that we have the same palates and we enjoy the scent. So that was really lovely. And to Jack, what is the one thing that BMHS did well that you're very proud of? And also, what could we develop more?
There's so many things that we achieve. One is that in terms of working in partnership with mainstream NSS mental health care, is make them understand the Vietnamese culture and the way we dealing with the mental health issue within the family. Because one of the issues in British culture is that you treat the patient as individual, and regardless of their family member or the parent who look after them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So this is the main difference that we managed to get this message through to the mainstream service provider. On the other hand, not until 6-7 years ago, there's no Vietnamese qualified counselor in this country. And we managed to get it 4 or 5 of them qualified in the last 4 or 5 years. And we can fill the gap that people can have the Vietnamese counseling provided to them. On the other hand, we, apart from providing mental health support, we also looking at how we can promote the well-being of the whole community as a whole. So we have published the health newsletter, raising awareness in the community and throughout the country. And so one thing I do hope that in the future, and which I must confess that I'm failed, is that I'm unable to get younger Vietnamese generation involved in the community activity. And this, I hope in the future that more young Vietnamese involved in the community activity so they can keep the work in the community going on and going further. Thank you.
And for Cô Quỳnh, you're also the director of Vietnamese Family Partnership, right? Which is the only, or one of the last remaining communities that's now in Deptford. So there's a lot on your bowl to keep it out. And recently you hosted TATE gathering, right? There was a massive turnout. It was a lovely event. I was also there. We were all there together. We even get like padao, like it was amazing, very wholesome. But then how do you find ways to remain that well-being in the community now that you see that there's a growing numbers, like there's different, and there's just too many sectors, right? So
Yes.
how could you call that collective?
This is a challenge. It's of course a very, very big challenge. I can't say that we would do like perfect, but we could try. So that with the Vietnamese community in 2008, we got 24 organizations, and now we got about three of us left. And then we are the main organization now, have to work with the client group that Vietnamese mental health service. They haven't got anywhere to go, so that we are now organized a luncheon club for them. So at least they got somewhere to go. We learned a lesson, what Jack just said, about involving the younger generation to the service. So lucky for me that because we set up the Vietnamese language class since 2003, so that we managed to get quite a lot of Vietnamese into the younger Vietnamese, so one of my chairpersons here, so that's kind of young, so that they was even like our student or even like our service user, but they came in and helped. So yes, the big challenge, how to manage, how to work with very little resources. We've been organized community event for many years and very, very little we have to work. Every year people feel like they have to start again, and although, but we grow. We grow from few hundred people, and last event we got 5,400 people. So yes, the community are there. So that it's big challenge, it's hard, but we have to work. Yes. Yeah. So okay, thank you remind me briefly that we now are working with visibility of the Vietnamese community, and then we got a little bit of funding from the London Mayor about Untold Story Fund, so that we would work with the artwork in the public space. So that we've been through, nearly done with the consultation, and then we chose Thetford become a place for this artwork. So imagine Thetford is a place where we organize our event, so that come back, like culturally come back home. So we got a little space to celebrate the community together. So by holding the community together, sharing resources between the community, empowering them, we hope that we would improve the well-being of the community. So yes, that it is what we, after working with all our trustee and then work with all other, and we feel like that's the way to do. We won't be able to get something like Vietnamese mental health service, we know that, but it is something that 35 years of service, really, really big, legacy of the community. And when we do the artwork, we make sure that the Vietnamese mental health service should be in this artwork.
Just to clarify, it's like a monument project, so it's in public space.
Culture.
And I feel like monuments in general is such a broad topic, and I feel like it was your idea that we should have a monument somewhere.
Yes. Yes, it is. It is our idea. Yes, it is my idea. Sorry. It is my idea, but again, that to see that for the whole community to make it happen. Yes.
Thank you for leading it, because act as the voice, and that's how you empower the community. But see, I get a chance to be a part of this project through joining with Will and have a crash course on learning about the community, about VMHS, and for me, I think there's so much to celebrate about what Jack have achieved, and the community, everyone has achieved. But then this is time where we're turning into the new year. We're at this TATE. So how would a TATE look like in VMHS?
Now, the VMHS closing down, but we hope that the surviving community like Queen's Group, Vietnamese Family Partnership, and other 4 community organizations can continue and develop and providing the support to the community. And I also hope that more and more young Vietnamese engage with the community, because in the past, most of the young Vietnamese thought that community is for the first generation who do not speak English. But we have to bear in mind that community organizations is for everybody in the community. Without your involvement, the community will end up in that, because we cannot run it forever.
I wanted just to end, because we're coming to close, but I just wanted to just say, like, there is so much that you achieved and so much to be proud of over the years, and it's just like really a journey. It's like a huge journey, and so yeah, you just have a lot to be proud of about. And this is like an amazing day to celebrate. Being here at TATE Britain, Lunar New Year, so yeah.
It's New Year Eve today. Just another couple of hours will be the new year, the year of the dragon. I wish you all very happy and prosperous New Year. Thank you very much.